how you can take full control of your documents, avoid the common pitfalls that we tend to see across organizations that we work with, and put into place a system that actually works day to day. So for context, I'm Martin. I'm the sales team leader here at Valto. I've worked closely with organizations over a few years now across every sector who are struggling with that document management piece within SharePoint. I've seen what does work, I've seen what doesn't work, and what we have, I think, is a really reliable product. It will hopefully give you some good ideas how you can manage that document control moving forward. If you've got any questions throughout the session, just drop them in the comment box below. We'll make sure that we cover them all. Okay, great. So let's take a look at how SharePoint can help us with our document control. What we have here is a solution we've built. This is purely an example on an example SharePoint environment, but it can really give you some ideas as to how SharePoint can be used to manage your documents and handle things like review and approvals, handle aspects like permissions and governance around your documents as well. And it's a really simple, sleek, easy to use system. The system is made up of three main parts, I would say. We're looking at part one at the moment. That is this initial landing page. This is for a completely made up company that are called Holler. We can see the Holler logo in the middle there, lots of kind of grays, and you can kind of see that pulling through the actual landing page itself. And then the rest of this landing page here is really made up of larger tiles. And these tiles are just call to actions to take you through to the actual system itself. So through to the document library, which we'll come on to in just a second. But it's really important to highlight that the tiles, the links that you see on this page, these can all be updated. Everything in here can be aligned to your branding, to your imagery. There is no coding or development experience needed in order to get these pages really looking how you want them to look. You can go ahead and do this just like you would edit a widget on a smartphone. That's probably the best comparison. You can drag and drop and customize the size, update the links, no coding experience or anything like that needed to update these pages. But this initial landing page, really great way to drive traffic to the right areas within the system. The system itself is really just a document library here within SharePoint with some built-in automation. We'll come on to that in just a second. But it's a really nice way just to be able to at least drive traffic to perhaps the most frequently visited areas of that particular document library. That could be sorted by potentially folder structure, maybe aligned to some of the categories that you'd like to assign your documents to as well. So we can certainly come on to that. Now, thinking about the landing page, great, we've got a large tile here where we can view all documents, and that's exactly what we're going to do next. So if I click on documents here, this is essentially, quote unquote, the system, if you like. It is the document library here within SharePoint. It calls on some of the data that we can see in front of us to basically bump the document along its process. And it's a really nice, simple system to manage and maintain. So we'll have a little look. We'll use this complaints policy here as an example. And what I'll do is I'll just simply talk through the complaints policy and all the columns that are associated with the data underneath them against each of the policies here in this example library. So we have our documents over on the left-hand side. We've got some example documents here. And for the complaints policy, straight away, I can see some information regarding its department that it's related to, its approval status, its version number. We've got review and approval dates a little further along. We then have review periods tied to that as well, who the named reviewer and approvers are for this particular document, a tracker group and a tracker required column, as well as a key document, simple yes or no field at the end. We'll come on to the tracker piece in just a moment. But to look at these columns from left to right. Actually, the first piece of interest really is within these three dots. Whenever you see three dots anywhere in Microsoft, it always means more actions or more options. By clicking on that, the one piece I wanted to highlight is this version history. The version history within SharePoint is great. It allows you to basically get a full audit history of your document. So you can go ahead and you can look at the previous versions. We saw that the most recent version for this document was version 6.19. Now I can scroll all the way down throughout all these previous versions here and go ahead and look at any version that there has ever been for this document, all the way right down to the very first one that was created back in 2019, we can see. So yeah, we're able to go ahead and do a couple of things against these versions. So for version 4.1, it could be that I want to check that out and see what it was like. So I can use that drop down there next to the date, and I can choose to view that document. So I can click on view, and that will basically take me to that version of that document, how it was at that time. So that will open up in a different window. I'm able to maybe do some side-by-side comparisons to the latest version, and I can basically check it out and see what it was like. It could be that what I see, I do like, and actually it was a better version of that document. So perhaps what we have now, maybe now we've made a couple of mistakes along the way, and we'd like to kind of go back in time. And you can certainly do that using the restore feature here. So that restore feature in the drop down does exactly that. It will make this previous version your most current version. So it's a really nice way of just being able to rewind time. I can go ahead and make this, yeah, the very latest version. That, of course, would be version 6.20 in the list here, and that just becomes the very latest version in the version history. I suppose version history as well, really, really useful for auditing purposes. If you do need to if you do need to prove to an ISO auditor that you've kept track of these versions, you're able to go ahead, show them this as evidence within your SharePoint environment. And you can capture basic information like when that review date was updated, when the document is going through major approvals, you can capture some additional data as well. So we can see the approval status was approved here, the next review date was set underneath. We can see who the approver was. You can even capture comments as well within the system. So every time you make changes to this document, you can go ahead and add comments that bump it up to that next minor version, and then look ahead to publishing the next major version. Again, something I'll come on to in just a second. But version history really, really powerful within the SharePoint environment. So again, that's accessed using the three dots, sorry, and then you go to version history. So a really useful tool to be able to show potential auditors or track your version history of your documents. Next column we come along to is the department, and this is a column that's been custom created. Doesn't have to say department here. You could prefer to have this as category. Maybe you sort your documents into types like work orders or policies, procedures. So you could go ahead and replicate that with a column like this. But for the purposes of the demonstration, we've got department here, and I'm able to sort, I can filter, and I can group by the different options that we have in here. So for departments, if I filter by IT, click on IT, you can see my filters being applied at the top of the list here, and all the documents that are appearing are aligned to that IT department. So a nice, quick, easy way perhaps for me to find the documents that I'm looking for. And your filters can stack. It could be that I'm interested in IT documents where there is a certain reviewer. And if I select Jenny from the list as my example, we select Jenny there, click on apply. You can see my two filters are being stacked here. So we've got IT and Jenny, and the view that we have obviously corresponds those filters and aligns really nicely to that. So it's a really simple way of keeping track of the different documentation that you have in here. The ability to group, sort, and filter can make finding documentation really simple, so long as that's a process and a method you have in place and it's communicated across the business. Even more powerful is the ability to actually, I suppose, drive traffic to this area. I mentioned that phrase when we were looking at the initial landing page, and you would have noticed that there were tiles on that landing page that were named after maybe ISO accreditations, or there was one that said view all documents. And what you can do is you can assign this particular view to one of those tiles. You'll perhaps notice at the top here that the filters can almost be seen in the URL. So we've got filter value 1 equals IT, and then we have filter value 2 equals Jenny. It's just the two filters we've applied. It's there, but it means that this URL is completely unique to the view that we have in front of us. So I can copy this URL, I could go back to the home page, I could quickly change one of these tiles here and rename it to be IT documents handled by Jenny. And we click on that and we're presented with the view that we've just gone ahead and created. So it's a really nice, simple way of driving traffic to the right area. We've done versions of this landing page before whereby perhaps you have a grid of these style links here instead, maybe a 4x4 grid of tiles that look like this, and maybe each one is named after a particular department or a particular type of document. You click on the marketing button and you're taken through to all the marketing documents and so on. So it's a really nice way to be able to help your users find the documents that they're looking for. Right, back to the document library itself. The next column we come along to is the approval status, and the approval status and the version number are linked really closely together. The way that this works is that the approval status will only ever tell you three things. It will say draft, pending, and approved. If it is draft or pending, these versions of these documents are not accessible to everybody. It is only your approved versions of documents that are accessible to the rest of the organization. And we lean on the permissions within your SharePoint site to be able to control who sits in what bucket, essentially. So who fits into the permissions bucket that allows you to see these minor versions, or on the flip side, who allows you to see just the major versions approved. Typically, what we advise is that you would have people who have the edit access to this site so they can edit the documents, and they would very much be your reviewers and approvers. They're going to be people who you would expect to be updating these documents on a regular basis. Everybody else in the business who is maybe just coming here for a read-only perspective, great. They can be allocated to the site visitor permission, and that site visitor permission will only present them with the latest major approved versions. So approved versions will always end in a 0.0, as you can see in the example 4 that we have here. However, in this scenario for this complaints policy, if I was a user that didn't have the right permissions, I would come into here and I would see version 6.0. I wouldn't be able to see version 6.19 like I can do at the moment. And that's because I wouldn't have the right permissions. So I can see the latest major approved version, whilst the reviewer and the approver, they deal with tinkering in the background and updating that, ready for me to go ahead and read when it next gets approved. So really, really simple way of managing the permissions. For those that are unfamiliar, your site permissions can always be found underneath the settings cog in the top right-hand corner. Hit in site permissions, and you'll see those three buckets there. You've got site owners, site members, and site visitors. So site owners, people with full control, edit access to the site. Site members, again, they have edit access. They can't manage the permissions like the site owners can, but they're able to update documents and access those minor versions that I've just mentioned. Site visitors is pretty much everybody else. So everybody else who's coming to this site for a read-only experience, great, they're going to fit into that site visitors bucket, and they'll be presented with your latest major approved version of your documents. We then have review date, approval date, review period, reviewer, and approver. And it's those 5 columns there that really just help to kickstart the very simple review and approval process that this system captures. The idea here is that Jenny is the reviewer in this case. When Jenny is ready to go ahead and submit this for approval, she will select the document, and in the menu there is a Submit for Approval button. Clicking on that triggers the workflow. So clicking on that will kickstart the Power Automate workflow that we have attached to this library, which then kickstarts the really simple approval process. And it's going to look at the named approver, it's Joe Bloggs in this case, and Joe will receive an automated email straight to him to say, FYI, the complaints policy, it's been submitted for approval and it needs your final decision. Within that email, there's an accept button, there's a reject button. Clicking on either of those allows Joe to enter in some comments as to potentially why he's making that decision. But of course, there's also a link to the document so Joe can go and have a look first, make sure that he's happy with what he's seeing, and give that final decision. If Joe rejects the document, we simply bump up our version number by another minor point. So we'll jump up to version 6.20. Jenny will have to go ahead and potentially review any comments that Joe has made and go ahead and actually do that process again. So make the changes and then submit for approval once again. If Joe approves the document, then we're going to start to see some of the information in here populate. So the approval date, that will self-populate based on when Joe has given his final say. So it will stamp that approval date. And then based on the review period, it will calculate the next review date for us as well. So in the example we can see here, we've got 12 months. We can see these two dates are 12 months apart. It was approved on in that date on 2021. And then it will be reviewed again on that date in 2022. So there we go. It's a really nice simple system, just like the one that we see here. We can see in this case it's actually 3 months, so we've got a couple of months ahead from the actual approval date, so from January to March, and then the review process will start again. So it's a really nice way to be able to just make sure that your documents are being kept up to date. And there's also additional automated reminders that are baked into these dates here. So, for example, 30 days ahead of the review date, the reviewer, Jenny, is going to receive an email notification letting her know that in 30 days this document is due for its review. And of course, you'll need to go through that process of submitting it for approval again. Upon approving the document, there are a couple of other pieces that will happen. Those really involve the next couple of columns here, where we have the tracker required column and the tracker group column. The tracker required column is a simple tick in the box. It's really a yes or a no, I suppose. But the tracker required column will determine if there is a tick, yes or no. If there is, then it's going to send that latest major approved version of that document to the groups that are detailed within the tracker group column. And for the complaints policy, we can see here how you can have many groups to one document, so you can have many to one relationship. But underneath, as an example for the disciplinary rules document, we can see that there's a one-to-one relationship as well. So there's an all staff group, and we'd always recommend an all staff group when you're looking at setting up the groups within this system. You're able to go ahead and just make sure that you can apply policies blanket across the entire organization. But there may be instances where you have policies, procedures, documents that only apply to a certain demographic within the organization, and that's where these groups come into their own. They're really, really useful. You're able to go ahead and point the direction of these documents at a very granular level. Now, these tracker groups, these can be plugged into existing 365 security groups that you might have on your tenant. You may already have these set up, in which so if that is the case, great. We're able to go ahead and use those groups as the tracker groups so that you can go ahead and start sending documents out in that manner. Alternatively, we can get quite clever with these tracker groups. We can start to call on information within your Entra ID platform. We can start to look at users' demographics like their location, their job title, their department, and you can pull all of that custom criteria together and create a custom tracked group. You may have documentation that affects a certain demographic of users within your organization, and it's them and them alone that need to see the latest policy for that particular role. Developers in London, or you could have marketing people in Huddersfield. You can go ahead and create all of these different categories, pile them together into these track groups, and you're able to then send documentation out based on those rules that you've put together. So the tracker groups, really, really useful. You can also have documents in here that won't do that step. So you can see there's a couple of documents here that have the tracker required column that isn't ticked. Now, that just means that the normal review and approval process will happen. That will carry on no problem at all. So in this case, Toby will still submit that document for review by Paul. Paul will approve or reject that, and that's it. But it won't then go ahead and send that to anybody else within the organization. And you may have documents that are like that. You review, you approve them, and that's fine, but they don't need sending out to anybody. People can come and read them as and when they need to. So the documents that do go through that tracker system, of course, you want to keep track of, well, who's reading them, who isn't, and you can certainly do that within the document tracker. And you can choose to view the document tracker list however you want to. Some example views we have is the ability to group it by user, you can group it by policy, or you can group it by a simple red, yes or no. If we look at the group by policy view, we can see here, we've got a couple of examples there, but for that complaints policy, I can see the expiry date, I can see the date that it was accepted for those people that have read the documentation. But for Steve and Toby here, they're flagged as no, they've not yet read that. They are receiving automated reminders in the background every 30 days with a link to the document asking them to read it and basically mark themselves as compliant. Now, in order for employees to mark themselves as compliant and having actually read and understood the document, there's a couple of ways in which they can do that. They can actually come into their own document tracker on the system itself. You'll have noticed that when I was at the home page, they have the ability to go into their own document tracker. So my document tracker, it will filter by me as a user. And when I click into this, you'll see that on the list here. So over in the top left, you can see the user is filtered straight away by myself. Now I am using our demo account here on the example that we have. It's all fully up to date for the demo user, so all good. They've got nothing to read, but they would appear in this list, and people can go ahead and read the documents, but also mark them as read as well. Underneath this mark as read column that we can see just here is a button. You click on that button and it will mark it as read for you. And it's the same within the automated emails that people receive. So everybody within the document tracker who is aligned to reading and accepting a policy, they'll receive an email. In that email is a link to the document, of course. We want that there. We want them to read it. But also there is a button, and that button will essentially just kickstart a small workflow to say that, yes, I've read that document. It's no good people opening the document and closing it very quickly. That doesn't register as actually having read the document. You're putting ownership on the end user to actually physically click that button to say, yes, I've read and I've understood. So you really are shifting ownership. And it's great because there's conversations that you can have then around, policies, procedures. It can really help out further on down the line if you need to know that somebody has read the policy for whatever it is, then you can go ahead and quickly use this view here to track that as well. Okay. Moving on to the track groups, I mentioned earlier how we can look at plugging in existing security groups, or you can go ahead and use your Enter ID or Azure AD as it was known to plug into the custom groups there. So those are the example groups that we saw in the documentation in the system before. It's a really nice way of just being able to keep track of these, and you can add and remove these as you need to, and as the business evolves potentially into different business units and departments, you can add and drop and remove these as well. So now that you've seen how the system works, click the video above to see a real story about a company that we implemented it for.